Hello, everybody, and welcome. Welcome to our webinar. Let's see, do we have the slides shared?
Yeah, I can share them.
Got a few people here already.
Awesome.
Okay, welcome to our Noxious Weeds in Western Washington webinar. We have Snohomish Conservation District staff and City of Lake Stevens staff here with us tonight. It's going to be a good time. You're going to learn all about noxious weeds and how to manage them.
Hey,
Okay.
all. Thanks for joining. My name is Taylor Pesh. I'm here with the City of Lake Stevens. And down below, if that's how it works for everybody, Paisley Bloom with the Snohomish Conservation District.
Hi, everyone. My name's Paisley. I'm a technician with the Snohomish Conservation District, and I'll be your presenter tonight as well. Um, Danny and Taylor, just let me know whenever we can get started or if we want to wait for a couple minutes to let people roll in.
What do you think, Taylor? Would you like to get started?
We'll just give it one more minute. I think I just saw another person drop in. So,
Okay.
Sounds good.
We did an icebreaker question for our other webinar. Shall we do one for tonight? If anyone's feeling talkative, maybe like, I don't know, what's a noxious weed that you're having issues with? And maybe you have one that you've come specifically to ask about.
That's a good question, Danny. Maybe I can give some specific input too, if
mhm.
anyone cares
Yeah.
to share.
We'll see if anyone's feeling chatty.
Well, okay. Well, I think we can get started.
Get started? Sounds good. Well, again, welcome everyone and thank you for being here. Today we're going to be talking about noxious weeds in Western Washington and most importantly, what landowners like all of you can do to manage them effectively. So this presentation is going to be really focused on practical management considerations, really trying to understand what weeds are, why they matter, and what are the tools that are available to control them, particularly looking at them in sort of a riparian setting. And in these urban and suburban environments. So we're going to cover how weeds are classified, how to identify and report them, what are some integrated pest management strategies. And then we're going to go over a few specific weeds and talk about how to control them, and then also some resources that are available as well. There we go. Um, this slide is just to prompt if anyone would like to ask questions, please do so. Feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation using the Q&A function. Is there anything else to add there, Danny?
Yes, I will say also feel free to talk in the chat, and if you can't quite find the Q&A function because it might be hidden under your more, you can also ask your question in the chat too.
Sounds good. Thank you. And then we are recording this webinar as well, so folks can watch it at any time. Just to introduce myself, like I said, my name is Paisley. I'm a habitat restoration and forestry technician for the district, and I'm going on 2 years working with the district now. I lead our wildfire resiliency program, and I also manage our native plant nursery here at the district, as well as doing some project planning and working with landowners doing technical assistance. One of my favorite district events of the whole year is the plant sale. Have a few photos on here, sort of featuring that. I also love just getting outside. My favorite hobby these days is riding my bike, just to get to know a little bit more about me. And feel free to contact me as well. I have my phone number and also work email here if anyone is interested in following up with questions or for a site visit as well. I'll pass it to Taylor.
Hey, thanks, Paisley. Thanks, Danny. Taylor Pesh here, City of Lake Stevens, surface water field technician with the environmental programs team. Um, the some of the stuff we do here is, what you're going to be listening to is kind of dealing with noxious weeds in the city. But on top of that, I do some, stormwater management and permit compliance for MPDS permit that the city maintains from the Department of Ecology. So one of our things is trying to get education outreach on different subjects that have to do, with stormwater, with water quality, with lake health, with environmental health that we want to try to keep maintaining and improve upon while we're here. So, yep, that's part of what I do, and really appreciate it. And I'll be dropping some links in the chat that will kind of go along with what we're talking about and assist you in like further education and outreach and research for your own properties and uh, kind of landscaping that you want to do. So
Awesome. Thank you,
go for it.
Taylor. Now I just want to jump in to discuss sort of what is a conservation district and what is our role in our county. Um, Conservation districts offer free technical and financial assistance to land managers in Snohomish County, and we also have Camano Island, in our service area as well. Across the district, we have a variety of teams, but our goal is to really work with these rural, urban, and suburban residents to improve habitat, soil health, and productivity, resiliency, and also water quality through the implementation of best management practices. So each of our team has a specific sort of focus. Our agriculture team really focuses on management of pastures, weed, and mud and manure, as well as soil health, while also helping farmers create sort of farm plans to build their agricultural resiliency and also working more in urban agriculture settings as well. We also have a community conservation team, which are more focused on urban environments and focusing on green stormwater infrastructure projects such as rain gardens, cisterns, and bioswales. And then we also have our floodplain and forestry team that focuses on habitat restoration, riparian, and working buffers, and forestry planning as well, and providing those resources to small forest landowners as well as folks who are living near bodies of water, particularly streams and lakes. And then we also have a really wonderful adult and youth outreach team as well that provide education and help us do workshops like this, as well as many other things. And there's lots of overlap in our team as well. If anyone has more questions about conservation districts or our role, feel free to pop those in the chat as well. So diving more into the contents and the meat of the presentation, I want to start by really defining noxious weeds. Noxious weeds are legally defined at the state level under Washington State Noxious Weed Control Board. The Noxious Weed Control Board sort of has three main responsibilities, and those are that it establishes the state's official list of noxious weeds, it coordinates with the county weed boards and local weed districts, and then also provides sort of public education, for both use of the county and then also those local weed boards as well. I highly recommend checking out their website. I sort of have this their their whole title right here on the screen, so you can just look that up. There's a lot of really great information and resources on their site, and those decisions on how noxious weeds are classified is updated annually. And when the Weed Control Board is reviewing species. They consider and classify species based on their impacts to agriculture, wildlife habitat, human health, land values, recreation, and natural resources. And all of the species that are considered noxious weeds are plants that spread very aggressively and typically displace native vegetation and forage. Um, Noxious weeds can include non-native and invasive species across different types, so grasses, flowering plants, shrubs, trees, and also aquatic plants as well. Um, about half of all invasives are noxious weeds rather are escapees typically from gardens, and the rest of the plants were typically just introduced over time through sort of human travel and trade, and a lot of what we can do as stewards is sort of try to reduce that spread of noxious weeds. A lot of times, noxious weeds are also typically outcrowding native species that fish and wildlife really depend on. They can cost farmers, orchardists, and ranchers millions of dollars in control efforts and also loss of production, which can make the food we buy even more expensive. Um, they can typically are also sort of more annoying weeds in that they are really challenging to control, and they also create a really genuine threat to our natural resources, ecology, and economy across the state. Um, so that's just a really high level overboard for folks in Snohomish County. I recommend checking out our Snohomish County Noxious Weed Control Program. There's lots of great resources on there, and I'm going to refer back to them quite a few times for resources throughout the presentation. And then I'll pop back over to Taylor to introduce the Lake Stevens Biodiversity Initiative. I think you muted Taylor.
You are correct. Thanks, everybody. Yeah, just wanted to take a moment to talk about a small little project that folks can get into. and potentially help with like some citizen science. If anybody's familiar with the iNaturalist app, it's a pretty great resource to use to just really kind of narrow down some species of figuring out what you're looking at, but also just generally uploading that information that people can use to that other scientists, other folks like myself can use to like figure out where things are popping up a lot of, especially noxious weeds that we can start targeting to treat. It just kind of gets a good visual of well, I don't know, think what's going on out there in the natural landscape. So yeah, there's this project. If you if you have iNaturalist and you're not part of the project, but you still like post and upload different flora and fauna to it, you're already contributing to the project. But if you want to be more aware about it and see things that are specifically being found and uploaded in the Lake Stevens area, it's kind of a cool way to kind of see things and track it. So I use it to kind of find uh, different patches of knotweed or just whoever is around that posts a really cool animal or plant that I didn't know existed in the area. It's really nice to like just kind of keep up with. So yeah, you can either click on this QR code, and it'll take you there, and you can kind of check it out. I don't think you have to be signed in to even or sign up or sign in to check it out. But yeah, just a little sidebar for the little for our webinar to kind of check out and kind of ties into a good way to track and identify where the invasive plants are.
That's
Thanks,
really
Paisley.
awesome. Yeah, thank you, Taylor. That's super awesome. I'm going to be definitely checking that out as well and hopefully adding to it over time as I'm out and about in the county.
Appreciate it.
Mhm. So, sort of returning back to the idea of noxious weeds, I want to really break down the classifications for you all before we sort of discuss how to control them. So, we break down noxious weeds into three categories, Class A, B, and C. On this slide, we'll be discussing Class A noxious weeds, and featured here is a map of the distribution of a particular Class A noxious weed called milk thistle. And what I want to highlight here is that there is a pretty small distribution of milk thistle across the state. You can see a little bit also here in Oregon. Class A noxious weeds are introduced species that are of a limited distribution and are unrecorded in the state, and they pose a very serious threat to the state. All Class A noxious weeds are required to be eradicated. The idea is that these species are not widely distributed yet, and we still sort of have a chance at controlling them. Um, Class A noxious weeds are typically sort of newcomers. They're often only found in a few places, and the hope is that we can eradicate them across the state before they really get a foothold and spread. Um, it's really important that if you see Class A noxious weeds, that you report them. Again, you can use tools like Taylor just mentioned, iNaturalist, and I'll talk about a few more as well. It's very important to report them specifically to your county weed control board, as these are very highly threatening weeds. Next, we have Class A. Featured here is another map of spotted knapweed, and as you can see, the distribution is much greater compared to Class A. So Class B weeds are widespread in parts of the state, but still controllable in others, and control is required when they're locally designated, and that designation is made by the county weed control board. So another example of a Class B is knotweed, which we'll be talking about later and is very relevant to riparian areas. But essentially, Class B noxious weeds are very abundant in some areas of the state and rare or absent in others, and the goal is to control or reduce their occurrence where they are abundant in order to prevent them from spreading to other parts of the state where they don't currently exist. Next, we have Class C, and as you can see, Class C is even more widespread than Class B. Featured here on the map is a distribution of bull thistle. These weeds are typically very widespread, and control is always encouraged, but not necessarily legally required unless there's some sort of extraordinary case where the county again has said that it is required for control. In Snohomish County, the only Class C noxious weed that's required for control are these varieties of beach grasses, but all other Class C weeds are just encouraged to control. These are weeds that you'll likely see distributed across the state, often sort of in our roadways or also in other people's gardens or parks. So these ones might be ones that you're very familiar with, and we'll talk about a few more of those today as well. So a big question is, how do you even identify, especially when you're unfamiliar with these plants, and then how do you also report these noxious weeds? So I want to point out a few resources on top of the one that Taylor introduced. So iNaturalist is a great resource for both identifying, but then also this reporting. Snohomish County specifically has a page that you can also report noxious weeds on, as well as a form. This is more of a PDF form that you can access through Snohomish County's website on their noxious weed control webpage. So you can always report a weed through this form. And then I also encourage folks to check out the app Seek. Seek is a really great way to identify plants and also get a sense of like the general location of these species as well. And reporting is really helpful because it helps prevent the spread and also allows for early response. And when it comes to particularly controlling all weeds, but definitely class A and B, early response is really important because the best time to get a weed out of the ground was probably yesterday. So this early detection can save a huge amount of time and money and effort in the long run. So your work by just reporting these species and participating in platforms like these is really helpful for practitioners and land managers in the long run. So diving in a little bit more to talking about now that we know a little bit how to identify these weeds, how do we control them? And so I want to introduce a really important concept in noxious weed control management, which is the integrated pest management sort of structure. This pyramid here sort of shows two things. So as we go from bigger to smaller, we see that there's an increase in toxicity, but there's also an increase in intervention. So each layer of this pyramid is showing a different method of controlling a noxious weed, and often these are going to be working with one another as well. So at the top, we have chemical control, which is going to be its highest level of toxicity, and also a more extreme version of intervention. Chemical control, we're going to talk more about, is a very helpful tool. But like I said, it has this higher level of toxicity. Moving down one more is biological control. And below that is physical and mechanical. And on the lowest is cultural control. And we're going to dive into talking really about what all of these mean um, in a few slides. Sorry, I lost my place for a moment. A huge benefit of incorporating IPM is that you can sorry, my computer just did a little bit of a glitch for a moment. To rewind, the benefits of an integrated pest management approach include fewer resistant weeds, lower negative environmental impacts, and also reducing both the cost and the amount of typically time as well that folks are needing to spend in order to control these weeds. So the idea is that we're using many of these different methods for specific weeds in order to control them. So again, the first step in controlling a noxious weed is identifying your plant in order to know what you're dealing with, and then you can create a plan to manage it. Knowing its life cycle, whether it's an annual, a biennial, or perennial plant, will affect the control methods. Knowing when it reproduces is going to help define sort of the frequency of treatment and sometimes also the type of treatment and controlling that population and preventing spread. It's also really important to know sort of its vulnerabilities, the conditions for the outbreak as well, and then also the toxicity level. Especially the toxicity level is important for keeping yourself and also your other loved ones and pets safe as well when you're controlling this weed. And I also just want to point out this weed amount program rather is through the Washington State Noxious Weed Control Board, and it can provide some really great resources on how to control noxious weeds. So feel free to check that program out as well. Once you've identified your plant, the next step is to define your tolerance. So it's really important to set an action threshold, which is often the level at which the pest becomes a hazard or becomes a significant enough issue that land managers want to take action. So this can look really different for the type of land that you're on, and also for each pest. So when you're setting your threshold, you really want to keep in mind the current size of the population. So if you have a smaller or a larger infestation, you want to consider also the reproduction and the potential for the seed to spread or the roots to spread as well. Um, and then you also want to consider some of the environmental conditions as well. So if you're in a farming setting, if the soil or land is actively being grazed, or if you're using this area for recreation, these are all important things to consider when you're also setting this threshold. Thresholds can be both economical. This we really often see with farmers where they don't want to lose too much of their land to a specific noxious weed because they need that in order for that to be productive farmland. Those thresholds can also be ecological. So if you're really trying to prioritize creating wildlife habitat, for example, then you'll want to reduce the amount of noxious weeds. In order to create better habitat for that wildlife. And then they can also be very goal-based. So when you're setting goals, you want to really think about, are you trying to eradicate this weed and is that possible, or do you want to control it? Oftentimes with noxious weeds, eradication is not always really in the cards. So what we're really trying to do is reduce that spread and reduce the population of the noxious weeds. And then also considering um, sort of the sufficient forage, this really plays back into wildlife. And then also what is your desired plant community in the place that you are managing as well. So these goals can be really based on what you want to see on your property, but overall, the idea is that you're wanting to reduce these noxious weeds. Once you've identified your plant species and you've also sort of set these thresholds and goals for yourself, you want to choose your control strategy. So this is really to call back to that pyramid. We have these different methods of control. Cultural control is defined as altering the current environmental sort of standard and making it less hospitable for these undesirable plants. So this can be changing, for example, the soil by, for example, doing something like sheet mulching and creating shade. And an agricultural sense, this can be adjusting grazing schedules and preventing compaction. It can also be creating competition through the planting or seeding of native plants as well. We also see mechanical and manual control, which can be as you can imagine, just by the name of it, it can be anything from pulling, hoeing, tilling, disking, digging, cultivating, mowing, dragging, plowing, or spot burning weeds. So this one is really has to do with what can you do with your hands and tools. And the effectiveness of mechanical and manual control can vary with timing and also the weed life cycle. But with a lot of dedication, typically this can be really effective, but it is a bit more of a typically a longer term approach. Um, and when you're using equipment, it's also really important to take care not to transport weed seeds between sites. So always make sure you're wearing proper PPE for plants that can be harmful to humans. And then also you want to consider minimizing soil disturbance, which can expose additional weed seeds and potentially create more of an issue. Um, we'll also talk a lot about chemical control. I have many slides about it, but chemical control is the use of herbicides in order to control noxious weeds. And then we also have biological control. And biological control is essentially using insects, bacteria, or fungi to reduce the vigor of a targeted plant. And generally, these are only available for very specific plant species as they are host specific. So this can be something like targeted grazing for a biological form as a biological form of pest control. Um, so these also, especially when we're using something like insects, you have to be very careful and do lots of research to make sure that you're not going to create a larger ecological problem in the long run. And we'll go over a few biological control examples as well. So to loop this back to the pyramid, we're on sort of step 4. You've identified your species, you've set your threshold and your goal. You've decided on your method of control, and now you're ready to take action to prevent pests in the future. So we have our integrated pest management strategy. Um, and a few things I want to point out here is this idea of early detection and rapid response. Um, this is a really important concept because one of the best ways to prevent the spread of noxious weeds is really to just be monitoring your property and scouting often so that you can really be prepared with this plan before it becomes a huge out of control problem. It's a lot easier to manage a small area than it is to manage a large infestation. So the idea behind early detection and rapid response is monitoring and being prepared with your integrated pest management approach. It's also really important to just keep records, especially over time, and if there's maybe other also multiple stakeholders involved in managing this land, in order to keep an idea of what are the species on site, what are those population sizes, and also what have you tried to do to control these species and what has worked and what has not. So these are really important things to consider about when starting on this action of controlling noxious weeds. This is just a sort of callback to be realistic in defining your tolerance. It's really a lot of work to control noxious weeds, especially when you have a larger infestation. So really remembering what your goals are and what those action thresholds are, and then evaluating how much time and effort you have to put into this and where you might be able to pull in additional resources. Um, it can be really challenging, like I said. So it's really important to consider different types of control and also doing lots of research and finding what those best management practices are. And I'm excited to share a few of those with you today. Um, this is when we're going to really start to dive into talking about pesticides, which is a form of chemical control. Um, Pesticides and herbicides are definitely tools, but they're not the only solution. But sometimes chemical control is one of the most viable options for controlling a noxious weed. And I want to start by defining the difference between pesticides and herbicides. So, a pesticide is a chemical control for any sort of unwanted pest or organism, and an herbicide is a type of pesticide that is used specifically to control an unwanted plant species. So, just wanted to define those so that going forward, um, we can make sure that we're all on the same page. So herbicides can be both broad spectrum, which is also called non-selective, which means that they can target a wide range of plants. Acetic acid is an example of a broad spectrum organic herbicide that can kill grasses, sedges, and broadleaf plants. And then alternatively, herbicides can also be a little bit more narrow or a selective herbicide, which targets only a very specific plant category. So um, we have like a synthetic herbicides, for example, that only targets broadleaf species. So when you are deciding to use pesticides, some questions that you want to consider is, are you able to follow all of the protocols and instructions for the chemical that you want to use listed on the label? What are your site conditions? And what are the strategies that you're going to use to control this weed? Because it's typically not going to be just using herbicide. This is typically one component of a larger integrated pest management approach. So that's really the framework, and chemical control is really only a part of that. Um, One of the best resources that I can provide around pesticide use is the Pacific Northwest Pest Management Handbook. This is an online resource where you can essentially in the search bar, which you can sort of see here at the bottom of the slide, you can type in whatever weed that you have, and then what will pop up is a list of all potential herbicides that can be used in order to control this weed. And it will also give you really important information on sort of the rate of use, the timing of use, how much to use and all of that sort of really important information, as well as ways to access the label as well. Um, Typically, I like to do an example of one of these, and I am going to try, and I'm hoping that there won't be tech issues. So, I'm just going to pick Scotch broom as an example, which is a noxious woody shrub. And so I've typed that into the bar, clicked apply. Let's see, the tech issue that I was hoping wouldn't, oh, there we go. Sometimes you just have to be patient. Um, let's see, pick a different one. Let's pick ragwort. Sorry, I've been having some tech issues with my computer all day, so see if this works here. Oh, there we go. So I've typed in a different weed. Tansy ragwort is one. And so as you can see, what's popped up is the name of the active ingredient and then some of the brand names as well for an herbicide. And then we have information on the rate, the timing, some general remarks about the herbicide. It also is going to give you your trigger word and some important information on safety, the site of action, which is just a chemical term that's not super important, and then also the chemical family. So this is one herbicide with lots of information on it, and then you can scroll down and you can see there's other options as well. So this can help you choose what kind of herbicide to use for the specific weed that you're trying to treat. All right, let me see if I can go back to my slides now. There we go. Thank you for bearing with me with the technicalness of it all. Okay, perfect. So this is a really great resource that I highly recommend checking out if you are considering using herbicides in order to select the correct herbicide for the plant. The other really important thing about herbicides is that it is the law to read the label. You must read it in its entirety and follow it to the T, in order to keep both yourself safe, but also the ecology of the area that you're in safe as well. When you're reading labels, they are typically very long and they can be a little bit confusing. So I just want to focus on a few things that you should expect when reading the label. One is going to be the weed applicability list. So these are the weeds that you can use this herbicide on. It's also going to provide instructions on mixing and applications, instruction, and then it's also going to give you information on the PPE that you need to wear. Please follow that. One, it is the law, and two, it is in order to keep yourself safe. It's also going to give you information on re-entry and pre-harvest intervals, and as well as disposal instructions as well. And one resource that I found recently that I found really helpful when I was first learning about herbicides, and I often refer landowners to, is this EPA label reading guidance. So it can help sort of break down some of that technical jargon, that you can sometimes find in labels, and just break that down and explain it a little bit better. So again, that's the EPA label reading guidance. And if you just look that up, it's the first link, and it'll give you examples of, sort of example labels, and then also with some of those definitions and breaking down what that means as well. Some other general tips when it comes to using herbicide is that timing is really everything. So we really want to consider that when we're using herbicides, the purpose of these herbicides are to kill a plant. And so that means that they can be very toxic to many of our birds, our pollinators, as well. So we really want to think about the timing that we're doing that and not in order to reduce the harm that we do onto our wildlife species. You also want to consider weather as well. So when in really windy conditions or rainy conditions are not when you want to use herbicide. Also when it's really hot or really, really cold are times that you don't want to use herbicide. So there's a bit of a narrow window. Our herbicide season on like the restoration side of things is typically during the summer. Most herbicides have an 80 or 85 degree temperature threshold where you don't want to spray over that. And then 60 degrees is typically that bottom range. But again, you want to make sure to look at that label for those specific, thresholds. But that's just sort of the general temperature guidelines that I've seen. You also want to consider that applying more herbicide is not necessarily better. And again, this goes back to the label. You want to make sure that you're following those application instructions, because applying more herbicide does not mean it's going to kill the plant better. All it does is that you're adding more herbicide into our environment, which is typically unnecessary and will just cause more harm, again, to other species, both wildlife and plant life included. Um, Something else that you want to consider is your own individual property. So, do you have any sensitive populations in the area? This can both be humans, animals, plants, and crops. This is something that we look at before we ever consider using herbicide on any of our projects. You also want to consider if you have any aquatic areas on your property as well. There's very specific rules around using a herbicide in aquatic environments, and in order to spray in aquatic environments, you have to, one, have an aquatic endorsement and a pest through the EPA, you get a pesticide license. Um, and there's also specific aquatic endorsed herbicides as well. Um, you also want to consider if maybe there's any sort of organic drop, designations nearby your property as well. Um, when you are also doing larger applications of herbicide, you want to make sure that you're documenting those things. And when you're documenting an herbicide application, that should include the amount of acres, that you're applying to, the amount that was applied, the date, the wind speed, and some other general like temperature information. And you also want to always make sure to post signs on the perimeter and access points in order to make sure that anybody who might be around is aware that pesticides and or herbicides were used in that area, to keep them safe, but also to limit liability for yourself as well. Because again, these are dangerous chemicals with the purpose of killing plants. So these are really important things to consider. When you are using herbicides as well, there are some specific rules around transportation and storage. So it is against the law to transport pesticides in the cab of a car. And you also always want to make sure that wherever they're being stored, they are locked and labeled. So that includes during transportation, but then also wherever they're being stored. So for example, our pesticides are always going to be stored in sort of this like metal, cabinet situation. It's labeled with pesticides. It has warning labels and is always, like I said, going to be locked. Um, Another resource that I wanted to share with you all is the International Herbicide Resistant Weed Database. Might not be applicable to everybody, but it's really interesting. Essentially, this database records all sort of herbicide resistant weeds. Many of our noxious weeds are not considered herbicide resistant. I think there's around 130 species across the US that have been identified as herbicide resistant. But it's just good in your planning process to do a little bit of cross-checking just to make sure one of your weeds is not one of those that is herbicide resistant. And also, this site has some just good information and resources as well if you want to learn more about what herbicide resistance is and how to not contribute to it. When considering the control of noxious weeds and particularly herbicide as well, we also want to think about adaptively about how we're managing these areas as well. Um, So regrowth and infestation is a really huge issue in the sort of the process of controlling noxious weeds. Oftentimes we'll see like a secondary regrowth that requires sometimes a very aggressive response, and sometimes a less aggressive response. It really just depends on how effective that control method was. So again, this goes back to that monitoring over time and that planning and recording what kind of control method you did. Um, Oftentimes, this requires surveying and then also doing spot treatments as necessary, especially if you have a less aggressive response. Let's say you have maybe a larger area a larger infestation of blackberry that you've sprayed and it was pretty effective. You want to make sure you're going back through there, surveying, and then finding where maybe there are a few sprouts or that have come up and then treating those as an individual. We also want to consider rescue treatments as well. So, if an outbreak cannot be controlled, how can we prevent further dispersal? So, that's really about controlling the seeds and reproduction. So, that can be something like deadheading flowers of a noxious weed, which we'll talk about. That can also be treating the edges of an infestation as well to prevent sort of the additional spread of that noxious weed. And then something that's really, really important in the approach of to controlling weeds is actually planting native plants and buffers. So these have a huge benefit in many, many ways, such as filtering runoff and creating wildlife habitat, water infiltration, increasing diversity and just a general abundance of native plants, but also it can prevent the spread and outbreak of these noxious weeds as well. So these things really go hand in hand. And anytime you're doing any sort of control for noxious weeds, I would recommend the additional planting of native plants. Perhaps there's a few exceptions to that rule, but typically, if you're in this natural environment and you're removing noxious weeds, one of the best ways to make sure that they do not return is to replant with native species after. Um, we're not going to talk a lot about farming during this presentation, but I do want to highlight that there are also poisonous weeds in Western Washington, particularly ones that can impact livestock. Um, on the left here is a photo that says protect your horses and livestock from toxic plants, and that is a screen grab from a really wonderful resource. This image on the right as well, that is sort of um, a diagram of the different class types and then what that might be toxic to for livestock. These are from the same resource and they're from the county website, I believe. And I really recommend that if you do have any livestock, checking this resource out to determine if you have any noxious weeds on your property that could be toxic to your livestock. Something that's really important and to just tie back to this idea of early detection and rapid response is the prevention of spreading noxious weeds as well. So in a terrestrial sense, we really want to think about what are the materials that we're bringing onto our properties and could noxious weed fragments or seeds be sort of hiding in them? So really considering that when you're bringing things like hay, bedding, or mulch, that you're getting really clean sources from that, as well as soil. Um, because I've definitely heard many stories, and I know Taylor and I were chatting about this too, where folks are, get some soil from, the neighbor down the road, and unfortunately has a bunch of knotweed fragments in it, and now you have a huge knotweed problem on your property. So really considering where that material is coming from and making sure it's from a clean source, it will be really important in the long run from preventing new or more noxious weeds from establishing on your property. You also want to consider that there's other ways that this can be tracked on as well. So things like tire clothing, tire clothing, rather vehicle tires, clothing, and boots. So making sure that all of those things are being cleaned regularly, especially if you know you've been in an area that has noxious weeds before coming onto your property and walking around, that you're cleaning your boots, cleaning that clothing, and cleaning those tires. On the pasture side of things, there's also my area of expertise is not agriculture, but there are specific pasture conditions that can lead to more noxious weeds. For example, bare soil or the disturbance to that soil can cause more weed seeds to come up, especially because they have all of that wonderful area to spread and all of those re light resources, and there's nothing to compete with it when it's bare. Um, and then we've already talked a little bit about that early detection and rapid response, which really just looks like surveying and monitoring your property and looking for those fragments or small stems that might be popping up, which again, to tie back, is really important to make sure you have resources to know how to identify those noxious weeds. So things again like Seek or field guides, if you're really good at keying things out, but I highly recommend just using an app can really save you a lot of time in the long run and is pretty efficient and can get you, even if it's not 100% correct, it can get you on the right path to identifying that species and then creating a plan if it is a noxious weed. I also want to talk about prevention in aquatic environments, especially because we have the wonderful lakes around here and rivers, and we have lots of folks that are always are actively recreating on these areas as well. Um, so in order to stop the spread of invasive species, the three main things that you want to be doing is cleaning, draining, and drying your boats, jet skis, skis, or any other sort of uh, water recreation sort of vehicle that could be carrying invasive species, both um, vegetation, but then also I wanted to highlight here we have New Zealand mud snails in quite a few of our bodies of water as well, which is an invasive snail. And this image here was grabbed from the Snohomish County um, aquatic invasive species webpage, and they have some more information as well. But again, the rule of thumb is you want to always be cleaning, draining, and drying any of these recreational vehicles. Um, on this aquatic plants website from Snohomish County, there's also some other really wonderful resources, particularly how to identify aquatic invasive species, how to prevent the spread of those invasive species, and then helping provide some support on management of them as well. And then there's some interesting projects that are going on throughout the county from different practitioners and organizations that are working very diligently and hard to prevent the spread of invasive species. Um, there's also a pretty cool interactive lake plant map, which I thought was awesome. And then you can get some more specific information about where you might see these species. So if you're somebody, for example, who is recreating often on the water, it's really could be important for you to know where these plants and species are so you can take extra care to take those preventative measures from spreading invasive species in the long run. With that, we're going to transition into talking about a few specific noxious weeds. These will be mostly terrestrial, but I'm going to touch on two aquatic noxious weeds as well. If anyone wants to take a guess in the chat as to what these two noxious weeds on the screen are, feel free to take a guess. We're going to talk about both of them in a few slides. So the first species that we're going to talk about today is knotweed. Pictured on the screen here is an image of knotweed, and you can sort of see that there are these sort of white stems that are coming up, and that is sort of the structure of the flower. In the springtime, in the summer, you'll see, or rather more in the summer, you'll see them really starting to flower out. And you can see from the other photo as well, the knotweed is really spreading super far back into the side, and it can create a bit of a knotweed forest. So this is a species that grows very aggressively along rivers and spreads mainly through root fragments downstream during floods and also soil disturbance, and it can create a huge sort of monoculture of all knotweed. The key issues is that it spreads really fast and it can dominate riverbanks and outcompete native species, and that can be really challenging to control in the long run. This is a Class B noxious weed and is required for control in Snohomish County. Typically, chemical control is going to be the most effective for knotweed, particularly because of the way in which it spreads, which is through these soup. Even the smallest sort of root fragment can really get established as a new plant. So digging it up in that manual control of digging and cutting, is seen as a little bit more of a high risk method for controlling knotweed. You might be able to cut it so that this gets pretty tall. It can get upwards of 6 to 7 feet. And so you might consider cutting the knotweed down and disposing of that. Always never in your compost. Please do not put knotweed in your compost, but rather sealed in bags and put in the trash. And then you could spray, so you can sort of have a combination approach there. But chemical control is definitely going to be the most effective approach for knotweed. And typically we see those treatments happen in the summertime between June and September. Um, the two herbicides that I'm most familiar with folks using is both imazapyr and glyphosate, which are systematic or systemic rather herbicides that move into the roots of the plant. Um, Other applications of herbicide, one that's a little bit more direct is also a hollow stem injection. Typically, I see practitioners doing this more in the middle of summer, when the stems are sort of beginning to dry and split. And this is sort of a very direct way to apply herbicide that's as opposed to the foliar spray, which is going all over the plant. This is an injection. So that's another method of control that is also chemical. The next species I want to talk about is reed canary grass, which is a Class C weed and is very widespread across the state and not required for control. However, we really can see that reed canary grass dominates our floodplains and also wet pasture areas, and like knotweed, forms really, really dense monocultures that crowd out native vegetation and also really impacts the hydrology of our floodplains as well. We see sometimes sheet flooding and then also channel incision. One thing that I remember when I first started at the district is I went on a site visit and actually saw stranded salmon laying on top of these really, really dense rhizome mats of reed canary grass, and they weren't able to navigate actually into the stream because the the root mats was so dense that they couldn't swim through it. And so there was a good handful of salmon that ended up dying because they weren't able to navigate back into that stream because of this dense monoculture. So just to put that into perspective, the sort of the ecological impact of reed canary grass. There's a few different control methods for this species. One is sort of manual control, which can include stomping, which is sort of the process of knocking down the stems and keeping them flat on the ground. Um, and tilling as well is a similar idea where you were breaking reed canary grass up. And I just want to point out that these are methods of control, but definitely need to be followed up with sort of this cultural control method as well of shading, typically through the planting of native vegetation. So in order to compete with the reed canary grass, so we sort of really like to use these in conjunction with one another. So planting native species and then physically knocking down the reed canary grass in order to allow the native vegetation to grow above the height of the reed canary grass, so then it can outcompete and shade it in the long run. So that's a very long-term approach that many practitioners are using. In a similar note, we've also used the method of both cutting or mowing and scraping. And so scraping is actually removing both the top sort of shoot of the grass as well as some of the roots around wherever you have a native plant that you've planted. And so again, that's the idea of releasing that native plant to allow it to grow. Similar concept with mowing is just knocking it back in order to get those native species sort of a head start in the competition of growing and establishing in that area. Another method of reed canary grass control, which is really interesting, is called solarization, which is the process of covering reed canary grass in order to prevent any light from having contact to do photosynthesis with the species, with the plant rather. And the idea is that that will kill the grass. And then once you remove that plastic, that barrier after an entire growing season, sometimes upwards anywhere from, 8 weeks over the growing season up to a year. And then you have bare ground to then again plant with native vegetation. Uh, one another One other approach to reed canary grass control is chemical. This is often needed more in larger infestations. Um, and I've sort of seen varied success with this. It's not something that we're typically using a lot in our riparian areas because they're super wet and we trying to reduce that runoff in our project areas, but is also can be a viable method of control as well. This next slide is discussing Himalayan blackberry. The photo here, you can see that we have a big pile of blackberry on the left, and then sort of bare canes and sort of around. And this is really showing that sort of almost like a before and after, but in progress of blackberry control. Um, Blackberry is also a Class C weed and very, very widespread. This is one we can see across the county and probably many folks are familiar with. Blackberries form really dense thickets that block access and to resources and again outcompete those native plants. There's a variety of best management practices for controlling blackberry. One of my go-to methods is a manual control, which involves pulling the stems near the ground and removing the entire root ball from the blackberry. This is really effective, definitely on young plants, and it's much easier to do this work right after sort of rain or when the soil is really loose, but you can do manual control year round. Um, Digging out the root crowns is very effective, but also very labor intensive. So I don't want to, say that this is easy by any means. Brush cutting and cutting back can also be really helpful as well, and creating what we call rafts, which is the process of laying down another material on the ground. Then you can sort of cut back the blackberry using brush cutters or loppers, pile that on top of your raft, and then dig out the root balls. And the idea is that we want to make sure that those roots aren't having any contact with the soil. So that's the purpose of that raft, to allow the material to dry so that it can't reestablish in the soil after you remove it. Another method of blackberry control is herbicide. Typically, we're using things like glyphosate to effectively control blackberry, and treatment with glyphosate needs to be sort of combined again with this effective revegetation of the site in order to prevent that reinvasion of undesirable species like blackberry and also to control often erosion, especially if you're on a sloped area as well. Um, Typically, we're seeing chemical control being done in June through July and August, so sort of those September months. And it can is really effective when the canes are actively growing and after those berries have formed. So, if you are planning on using herbicide too into sort of late summer and fall, you want to make sure that that treatment is done before it starts to freeze or rain. The next species I want to discuss is butterfly bush. Butterfly bush is a Class B weed, and it's highly invasive. Um, and again, we want to approach this with a combination of mechanical removal and particularly aggressive deadheading, to prevent the seed spread. So that involves cutting off the flower heads. Um, that is both a method of manual control, which you can also do hand pulling as well, especially if they're sort of young seedlings or smaller plants. But as they get bigger, they get a little bit woodier, and it becomes a lot easier, or a lot more difficult rather, to pull out and dig out those species. Much like blackberry after a rain or when the soil is soft, it's going to be a lot easier to do that manual and mechanical work. In terms of disposal, you never want to leave cut branches on the bare ground, just like blackberry, because they can form roots and regrow. So you want to dispose of those large branches by sort of putting them in bags. I've heard of some people burning them as well, but make sure that you're always getting like the correct permits for that as well. Um, Another method of control for butterfly bush is chemical. One method is called a cut stump method, which is highly recommended for like particularly woody vegetation or woody noxious weeds, and it can be very effective in eliminating these bushes. And so essentially what that looks like is cutting off the top growth and then applying herbicide directly onto the stump that you've just created. And so then that herbicide will be taken in by the roots in order to kill that species. Typically, cut stump treatments are done in sort of the later summer and early fall, as opposed to the foliar spray, which can, well, similar to the foliar spray, actually, they can also be done in the summer into early fall. But again, you want to do that before sort of rain and frost. I've seen foliar spray applied more so on um, smaller infestations, and a lot of the time we see butterfly bush in sort of gravel bars and in these disturbed areas. And these gravel bars sometimes can be within the stream or along the stream bank. So you want to be really, really cautious if you are going to use herbicide. I wouldn't recommend doing that when it is along that stream bank and trying to opt for that manual control when possible. Particularly, like I said, the deadheading of those flower heads can be really effective in preventing the spread of that species as well. Next, we're going to talk about two viney species. The first one is common ivy. In the photo here, you can see it growing sort of up on the tree, and then sort of a zoomed in picture of some of the leaves, and you can see it's an evergreen vine. It is a Class C weed and is very widespread across the state, and again requires sort of a mixed strategy approach. However, I have seen mostly it being controlled manually and mechanically. And part of that is that common ivy has very thick, waxy leaves and a very thick cuticle that can repel sort of like liquids sometimes. So it can be a bit more challenging to find an effective chemical control. A lot of the times, manual removal is very highly effective. And it's really important to also prioritize if you have this ivy growing on trees to prioritize getting the ivy, disconnecting that ivy from on the trees from the rest of the root mass. So creating what we call tree rings, which involves cutting all of the climbing vines sort of at around chest height, all the way around the tree trunk, and then prying those vines off of the bark carefully. You definitely don't want to sort of reduce the harm that you're causing to the tree. Um, for the upper vines, if you do disconnect all of them using that tree ring method, then you don't need to necessarily pull down all of those upper vines. If you are able to get some of them, particularly on like some of the lower branches, that can be helpful, but those top vines will die. And just sort of wither on the tree if you do effectively disconnect them all the way around. You'll also probably see ivy really in this sort of creepy crawly like ground mat growing pattern, and those can be really tough to manage. But once you sort of get them pulling, you'll notice that it just starts to form almost like a yarn ball. And so one of my favorite methods of controlling ivy is just digging it up and rolling it. And so you can almost create like a blanket or like a burrito of ivy, and just roll it like a carpet. And then you can cut the roots as needed, and create these big piles. Again, you're not going to want to ever put those piles like on bare soil. If you need to leave them to dry, making sure they're on a raft or some um, some sort of surface so that the roots can't have contact with soil to get reestablished. You can manually, again, pull these roots up. It's a lot easier when the soil is more damp and soft. Just using something like shovels or Pulaskis can be really helpful in having those pruners as well, which is true for most forms of manual control. You never want to compost these live vines, so you definitely want to make sure that they're dry before disposing them into any sort of yard waste as well. Next, I wanted to discuss field bindweed. This is a Class C weed. Um, Chemical control can be very effective, particularly in combination with other techniques, because it can have quite a significant reinfestation. So hand pulling as well can be really effective, but sometimes these mature plants can be really difficult to get. So maybe that's when you consider using herbicide. Um, Frequent hand pulling can be really labor intensive, but again, if you are very persistent and dedicated to removing this vine over time, much like ivy, you can see a really huge drop off. And very similar tools, using things like pruners, shovels, and Pulaskis as needed. Um, the next species I would like to discuss is purple loosestrife. Um, Purple loosestrife you'll often see growing on lakes and streams and shorelines and in wetlands. It's pretty widespread and it is a Class B weed. Some of its main impacts is that it spreads really vigorously and it can really take over wetlands in particular, and it can form these really dense monocultures that, again, like many of these noxious weeds, displaces native vegetation, and really is going to reduce habitat, particularly for like some of our waterfowl as well, and also impeding just general water flow across some of these wetland areas or wet meadows as well. Some of the main control methods for purple loosestrife is manual and mechanical. So that involves digging and hand pulling as well as cutting and mowing. Um, So if you have sort of smaller areas, they can be dug up and pulled by hand and making sure to always remove all of the roots and all of the plant parts as well. You can also, again, deadhead these as well to prevent that seed from spreading. Um, you definitely want to make sure to, when you cut, to bag all of those flower heads as well to avoid spreading that seed. Um, Cutting and mowing can be somewhat effective, but again, because of the seeds on the flower heads, you want to be really, really cautious if you are going to do that because that can actually cause it to spread more, particularly during the summer months when we see that these flowers are actively growing. And if you're, especially if you're in a wetland area, that can be a huge challenge to do any sort of mowing as well. So I would recommend focusing more on a manual control. Um, Another option is chemical control as well. Um, but again, these are going to be more in wet areas, so I would really recommend manual control for this species. Next, we have yellow flag iris, which is a class C noxious weed. This species spreads very, very vigorously and can really overtake lake shorelines and wetlands as well. Again, forming these really dense monocultures and really altering sort of habitat, but also water flow and trapping sediment. And it can also really fill in wet areas as well. In particular, also even like detention ponds or like stormwater facilities, the yellow flag iris can really spread so quickly and reduce the amount of water storage that's available in these ponds because of how dense the rhizomes are, and it can really plug up those inlets and outlets, which can cause a lot of problems in the long run. One method of control is this cultural control of covering or shading out yellow flag iris. So something like a pond liner or a benthic barrier that is preventing sort of gas exchange and photosynthesis from happening can kill these plants, much like reed canary grass. This can take several months throughout the growing season. And the edges of the liner or barrier need to be buried so that there's sort of no gaps where light or rhizomes can spread underneath. So heavy tarps can also be effective. And you want to make sure that you're also extending the covering at least probably about a foot past wherever the infestation is. And again, that's because these roots are so dense and they spread so well that you want to make sure you're really cutting that off from accessing any of the sort of light and nutrient resources. Um, Another method of control is mechanical or rather manual, which is digging, hand pulling, and cutting. This is particularly effective in smaller areas, and you want to make sure that you remove all of the roots and all of the plant parts. Um, some of these plants can also sometimes be partially growing underwater, which is something to consider as well. So that can be an extra sort of challenge. And again, you can deadhead and make sure you get those seed pods and flowers bagged um, before removing anything else. I do see a hand raised. Danny, I'm wondering if you might be able to help, or if I should just view, or if there's a proper protocol for facilitating a hand raise.
Let's take a look. Julie, if you have a question, if you wouldn't mind posting it in the chat or the Q&A. I don't believe that participants can actually talk out loud, but if you put it in the chat, we will for sure answer it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Mhm.
While we're just waiting for that question to come in, I'm just going to finish up this slide. The last method of control for yellow flag iris that I wanted to discuss was chemical control, which can be appropriate for certain infestations. There's particularly this one method called wick wiping, which is like, as you can kind of see from the image, where you're almost taking these like tongs and sponges with herbicide on them and directly applying it to the plant, which can be very effective. But it can be slightly risky because you're coming in like, well, with all forms of chemical control, you are going to be coming into contact with, um, or rather near herbicide. So just using extra caution, is always important. The next species I wanted to discuss was Scotch broom. This is a Class B weed. It's a very highly flammable plant, which is one of the reasons I like to talk about it, especially from a wildfire standpoint as well. Um, we definitely see Scotch broom a little bit more in drier areas, so upland, along roadways and disturbed areas as well. One of the most effective ways of controlling Scotch broom is through the process of weed wrenching. And for anyone not familiar with weed wrenching, it is this essentially this metal tool where you can use it to attach to the bottom and just pull it back, and it gives you leverage in order to pull out the entire taproot. Because one thing about Scotch broom, it has a very, very deep taproot, and the idea is that we want to remove all of those roots in order to prevent the spread or regrowth of the species. So definitely manual control is going to be highly effective, and I really recommend utilizing a weed wrench in that, and you can do that all year long as well. For smaller species, or rather smaller seedlings, you could also dig those up with something like a shovel. Another method of control is going to be that cut stump, which I already mentioned before, the process of cutting off the top growth and then applying herbicide directly to that stump. You can also do some foliar spray, but I've seen that cut stump is typically more effective. And again, that chemical control is going to be done during the summer. Next, I wanted to discuss aquatic invasive species. So, two in particular. We already sort of touched on New Zealand mud snail a little bit, but for our aquatic invasive plant species, we have both milfoil and also Brazilian elodia. Um, One thing is, I really want to point out that you do not want to attempt to purchase or apply any herbicides to a body of water on your own. This does require both special licensing and also special aquatic endorsed herbicides as well. Um, so for both milfoil and Elodia, manual and hand pulling is going to be the main method of control, but you want to be really cautious of um, not causing more fragments to spread. Um, Raking or sort of cutting sort of willy-nilly is not recommended because those cuttings can then actually produce more fragments that can spread and really worsen the infestation. So you want to be really, really careful that when you are sort of pulling out these species, that you're being really careful not to spread and create more fragments in the long run. Um, these can be really challenging to control as well, and I highly recommend reaching out and checking out more of Snohomish County's webpage too for some more information if you have a body of water with milfoil or elodia in it.
And
But
a question did come in. I don't know if you want to leave it to the end or.
oh, sure. I just wanted to be cautious of not like going in, I don't know, going to the chat if that was going to impact like the me sharing my screen. Is there any way maybe you could read it, Danny?
Yes, I can read it.
Okay, thank you.
Um, I have yellow iris in my pond and the roots are huge and I cannot pull them out. If I cover with plastic, what do I do with it after it dies? The roots are connected and heavy because they are waterlogged.
Gotcha. Well, the idea is that you don't necessarily need to remove if the berry has been effective at killing the plant and the roots, then you don't necessarily need to remove them. But I would recommend like follow-up planting as well. So I guess that would be my answer to that. And yes, definitely the waterlogged is a really tough situation to get those roots out. And you definitely want to be careful not to like create more fragments. So it seems like in that situation, covering would maybe be a better method of control, but you don't need to remove those roots after if they're dead, because there's not a risk of it resprouting because the roots are dead. So thank you for pointing that question out to me, Danny. Cool. So those are the main species that we're going to talk about. So to just bring it back and take a step back out, the goal with controlling our noxious weeds isn't just removing them, although that is important, but it's also restoring functioning buffers that help to create a healthy environment for all of our species and also to do things like stabilize banks, improve water quality, provide wildlife habitat, and also increase our climate resiliency as well. And the incorporation of native plants actually creates more long-term resistance to reinvasion from these noxious weeds as well. So these things really go hand in hand. Um, and I wanted to point out too some of work that we do at the Conservation District of riparian restoration, which really is the process of typically controlling these noxious weeds and then planting with native species. So if anyone is interested in learning more about riparian restoration, feel free to ask questions or check out our website or request a site visit as well. We really want to support both restoration and also agroforestry approaches to combine the ecological and also agricultural benefits of all of these plants. So at the district, we can support with pasture planning, forage production, soil testing, and nutrient management on like the agricultural side of things. And on the riparian restoration things, we can really help provide information on which species to plant where, because it's really important to select the correct native plant for the correct spot in order to, based off the environmental conditions, in order to make sure that it has the best chance of surviving and establishing, and also providing more resources on how to control these noxious weeds, based off of your very specific site conditions and property. And again, I sort of touched on this on the last slide, but we do have an agroforestry program, which involves sort of introducing plants for the sort of the multi-benefit of agricultural and ecological benefits. So these are typically species that are providing some sort of food source. And that's really exciting. So we do have that agroforestry program. If you have any more questions, I'd be happy to answer them, or you can read more about it on our website page as well. And with that, I would love to take some questions if anyone has them. I'm just going to go to this slide with my contact information, but very open to taking questions.
All right, for any questions, please do put them in the Q&A section, which you can find on the bottom with the three dots and more. If you click that, Q&A should pop up. That was a really good question though, Julie.
Yeah, and I can kind of add to that too. When you see yellow flag iris, most folks, I try to point them in the direction of, pulling it out and digging it out is pretty tough because of, where it's at, how big and heavy and combined the roots can be. At the very minimum, like one of the best things to do is just kind of like always deadhead the flowers before they go to seed. Obviously, dispose of those, and then even kind of like cutting down and or weed whacking the leaves, the big long, pretty thick leaves that come up. So just kind of like between removing its source of getting the energy and then removing its source of new plants over and over again, you can be fairly successful at reducing it. Like after cutting it, adding the solarization on top of it, if you can, would be great. And then, like Paisley was also saying, um, replacing it with plants is obviously like that final step once you've kind of got a little bit of control there.
Nice.
Thank
Yeah.
you,
Thank you,
Taylor.
Taylor.
We've got a couple others. For the Japanese knotweed, can you report it if it's on other people's property?
Um, You can. I would recommend utilizing that report a weed form on Snohomish County's Noxious Weed webpage. You can fill out the form, and there's a section to put sort of the address or location, and that just sort of lets Snohomish County know that there, um, yeah, is not weed there as well. I would also highly recommend if you know them as well, just being able to say like, look, maybe they might not know it's a noxious weed, so now that you have some of this information, being willing to share that out. And maybe they'd like also to take action on it as well, and just help provide some of those resources. Feel free to, yeah, send them towards the Conservation District or Snohomish County Noxious Weed Program.
Thank you, Paisley. And the next one is, what is the best time of year to tackle the yellow iris problem?
Gotcha. Good question. Um, for herbicide, all herbicides typically going to be during our summer months, just again because of those like temperature and weather conditions. When we're thinking more so about deadheading. You want to make sure that we actually have like those seed pods and flowers. So when those are actively growing is when you're going to want to do that type of treatment. And then for digging it out, my impression is that can be done throughout the year. I don't know if Taylor, you have different experience for like manual control.
No, I haven't had much experience, but yeah, keeping the fresh greens, leaves that are coming up, cut down,
Hmm.
just often as soon as possible is always great. And yeah, attempting to cut it and dig it up will help, but it's also a lot more work. So
But
Yeah.
any time of the year, really, just as soon as you start seeing flowers come up,
Mm,
pull them out.
just
As
cut
soon as you
them.
start turning
Yep.
greens, cut it up.
Yeah, I would agree. And I guess in terms of the shading, really it's not as important, I suppose, when you do it as to how long you keep it on. You really want to make sure those roots are completely dead before you pull up the barrier. Um,
Thank you. It doesn't look like there's any questions yet, additional ones. You might have answered all of them.
Fair
And
enough.
again, if things come up after the fact, after you've heard all this and you're exploring your property or yard, and you have questions, or like Paisley said, we always reach out to the conservation district. If you live in the city of Lake Stevens and you have a large patch of knotweed on your property, you can always reach out and talk to us and let us know. I'm kind of mapping all the knotweed, so as a city, we're working on where it's kind of infestations on public lands, and then once we kind of get a hold of that, we're going to start working on the public-private kind of combined patches that are existing out there, and start working to control those. And there's potential resources out there in the future, so you can always reach out to us at the city too.
Awesome. All right. Think we should wait a few more minutes or should we wrap up? Oh, Julie asked, can I tag along with restoration?
Can I tag along with restoration? Could you describe more of what you mean, maybe, Julie? Like you'd like to do restoration work, or you'd like to learn more about restoration work? Could you clarify?
Let's see.
I want to say yes, but
I want to learn
learn
how to
how
do
to
it
do it correctly.
correctly.
Julie, I feel like you should have a site visit. I would really recommend checking out our website and requesting a site visit and having a planner come out, and we can sort of discuss what riparian restoration looks like. We have lots of resources. In fact, on our website, we have one called Streamside Restoration that can give you some information about like what restoration really looks like. Um, but yeah, I would say a site visit seems like potentially a really great opportunity if you're wanting to learn more.
I would agree with that. They got great folks at the conservation district.
Okay, I posted a
Oh,
link in the chat on how to request a site visit. I will also include it in the follow-up email as well.
thank you, Danny.
I don't see any others coming in.
Well, great. I think that will cover our time then there.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yes, awesome. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight. Please keep an eye out for the follow-up email I will send out to all of you for additional resources.
Awesome. Thanks
Awesome.
for attending, and thanks Paisley in the conservation district.
We did just get another question.
Oh,
Perfect.
Okay. Can folks who live in unincorporated Lake Stevens report knotweed to the conservation district?
that would go to the county. The county
Mhm.
report a weed. Um, but yeah, if you're outside the city limits, it's tough for us folks at the city to do much about it. But the county would be your friend.
Yeah, so yeah, again, as opposed to Snohomish Conservation District, definitely you want to report that on the county to the county level. But good question. That can be a little confusing. We do share a name, so
Okay. Maybe another surprise one will pop up before we.
No worries.
Okay, I think we might have answered all of them. My eye is on the Q&A, but I think we did it.
Awesome.
okay, cool.
Okay.
Awesome. Thank
Thanks,
you,
y'all.
everyone. Have a good
Thank
night.
you. Have a great night.
Too.